over the last few years in this country, particularly during the pandemic, regardless of whether you're my libertarian friends or my progressive friends, the common sort of sentiment that I hear is some version of, am I crazy, or did the whole country seem to go crazy almost overnight? Right? And people feel like this sense of I knew we had differences, but it feels like we're starting to question some pretty fundamental values that we thought we all held. And for me, our work in this space at Populace, my think tank, has been around understanding what we call collective illusions. And so for me, this is an answer to actually no, we are not as divided as we think we are. And understanding the phenomenon of collective illusions helps you understand why that's true, but also why it feels like it isn't true. Collective illusions are social lies, right? They happen in situations where most people in a group end up going along with something that they don't actually agree with, simply because they incorrectly believe that most people in the group agree. And as a result, entire groups can end up doing things that almost nobody actually wants. And you know what I mean, right? So we've all had those moments where we thought we're the only one in the room, whether it's at work or with friends or whatever, where we think we're the only one in the group that holds a view. And so rather than speak up, we say nothing. And we're not alone, right? Research shows that nearly 2/3 of all Americans admit to this kind of self-silencing. But you can see the problem here, right? If most people are self-silencing, then the loud fringe is the only voice that people hear. And the result is this collective illusion. And that's exactly what's going on in the country today. What we find is that of all the places where collective illusions reside, the institution of business and the workplace ends up being one of the most prominent areas, in part because, when I'm at work, it's not the same as being with friends or even just strangers, right? And there's a lot of, financial incentive, if you will, and things around maybe I shouldn't speak up, right? And so we're just seeing a lot of that. And one of the most interesting things for me is at Populace, we did this, took us over a year to do this private opinion study about what people want out of the future of their own work, right? And it's pretty comprehensive, looking at trade-off priorities. And what I thought was so interesting is we're seeing not only illusions about social issues at work, but what you see is across all demographics, the vast majority of people want something different out of the work that they do now. They want more purpose. They want it to be less transactional. Things like they want real inclusion, right? Not just representation, although that's important, but can I be myself at work? But what's interesting is those same people are convinced that most other people don't want that, right? So even in the very nature of work, we're seeing these illusions where we're just wrong about the group. Other folks have done this research where it's basically a supermajority of people want these kind of things like childcare benefits, other things that make the work-life balance actually work. But they're so convinced that most other people don't take them or don't want to take them that they themselves choose not to, right? Because they don't want to look like they're standing out. But then, of course, the irony of that is that by me not saying what I really think and not taking advantage of something that's available to me, I am giving the signal to everybody else that I don't want it, right? And so we all end up under this illusion. And like I said, the entire organization can end up behaving in ways that almost nobody really wants. Collective illusions are different than groupthink in this way. It's a sort of special kind of groupthink. So both of them are coming from a place of conformity, right? Where we just want to be with our group. Groupthink happens when you're right about the group and you just go along, right? So we're all just doing the same thing, but that was what the group wanted and you just followed along. Collective illusions are this special case where you were wrong about the group to begin with. And so your conformity actually leads the group to behave in ways that they didn't actually want. And so talk about bad decision making, right? If you want to just conform and go along, that's up to you. You can decide whether that's good or bad for you. A truly bad decision, though, is one where you violate your own values or preferences, and you did it to belong to a group that didn't actually even want that in the first place. And so it's a sort of doubly bad decision. While social media has that democratizing tendency of giving everyone a voice, which is fantastic, that means it gives everyone a voice, right? And so the problem is, if you take something like Twitter, we know from research that 80% of all content on Twitter is generated by only 10% of the users. And those 10% are not remotely representative of the rest of the country. They tend to be more extreme on almost every social issue. But you can see the problem here, right? If only 10% of people hold an opinion, but you think it's 80%, then your brain is going to assume that's the group consensus. And if you don't want to go against your group, rather than speaking up, you'll just say nothing, right? You'll self-silence. But if enough of us do that, then this fringe voice is the only voice anyone hears, and the result's a collective illusion. And again, that's exactly what's going on today, where we know that 2/3 of Americans admit to self-silencing right now. I mean, 2/3. How does a democracy function if most people can't be honest with each other about what we actually think? Cancel culture is just the most egregious form of the cause of collective illusions, where it's not enough that we're disagreeing. I'm willing to ruin your life because we disagree, right? I'm willing to punish you socially, economically, sometimes even physically, which should just be unacceptable regardless of someone's opinions. But you can imagine, when I feel threatened, not only am I willing to say nothing, I'll do what the economist Tim Curran calls preference falsification. I'll actually lie about what I think just so you believe that I'm with you, right? And so that's the worst form. But here's what's interesting. So we, Cato Institute actually did the initial research showing 2/3 of Americans self-silence. At Populace, my think tank, we actually replicated that finding and found almost the exact same numbers. But what we did is we even pushed further in to understand why people felt like they couldn't be honest about what they think. And what was fascinating is cancel culture, the thought that you might be canceled was actually like not nearly the most dominant reason people were. In fact, the overwhelming reason people were self-silencing was out of decency. They actually didn't want to hurt other people's feelings. And so what's interesting is there's an illusion here too, which is overwhelming supermajority of Americans across all demographics report privately that they themselves are not sensitive. They actually want to be open. They want to hear differing views. However, they are absolutely convinced that most Americans are way too sensitive, right? So you can see the problem. If I think that you're super sensitive and I like you and I don't want to hurt your feelings, then maybe I just say nothing, right? So I actually think is good news, right? Because while cancel culture is awful and we shouldn't tolerate that, it's not really the biggest driver of these collective illusions. It's our mistaken sense of sensitivity with each other and our wanting to be decent people. There is a way out of these illusions, which are darkening the doorstep of our country. They are leading to things. They sow division. I mean, they manufacture polarization. They give us the sense that the rest of the country does not share our values, which we know empirically is not true, right? They actually foment distrust because shared values are the moral foundation of all trust. And so if I think you don't share my values, I'm unlikely to trust you. So this is a problem for a free society. So what do we do about it? Look, this will sound like straightforward, if not a little difficult. Look, it takes like three things. One, at an individual level, we have to find the moral courage to be honest with each other about what we think, right? Like this self-silence, I think a lot of us believe maybe we're only hurting ourselves, right? Maybe like I'm not getting what I want, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. But if you understand the phenomenon of collective illusions, then you realize that this silence is actually incredibly damaging to the very group that you care the most about, right? At the other end, we've got to find the civic courage to make it safe for other people to do the same thing, right? And we've lost a bit of that right now in our country, this commitment to free expression, right? This sense that Like there's almost like this lack of humility that I just think I could never be wrong. And so I don't need to tolerate the fact that you disagree with me, but it's just not true. And we're giving up some of those core liberal values that have animated our country, even if imperfectly, since its inception, and it's not okay. There's a middle place here with respect to organizations that I think is really important, because one of the things in our research that I found interesting is that everyday people, they know that they themselves feel social pressure and are self-silencing, but they are convinced that leaders and powerful people in general and the wealthy are not under those same social pressures. But we know from our own data that in fact they are. So CEOs of companies admit to self-silencing because they're worried about misrepresenting and getting out of step with the people they're supposed to lead. But this is the problem, which is like organizational leaders have such an outsized influence. And if you can imagine, you are just as likely to be under an illusion about what the people that work for you think and believe. So without challenging that, you are likely to actually behave in ways that double down on the illusion itself. So I think there is a really critical role for us for organizational leaders to commit to those conditions that enable people to be honest about what they think at work. We end up copying other people very quickly because we think this many people can't be wrong, or this expert knows more than I do. And sometimes that's true, right? It's not to say that other people aren't smarter than you sometimes, but we blindly copy. And what we find is that the easiest way out of that blind copying is, before you just follow the other person, just ask them why it is that they believe what they believe or made the choice they made. And what you'll find quickly is, if you're under this, what we call like a cascade, where it's not that everybody made this decision, it's that we're all copying like one person, right? That if the person can't give you a good reason, then you know darn well that this is just an illusion. Closer to home, one of the things was self-silencing, right? If we're so afraid that the group will be upset, I don't want to offend, I don't want to get ostracized, it turns out that there's a very easy shortcut here that will give you a sense for whether something's an illusion or if this is really what the group wants. And this is the idea of injecting some uncertainty. So let's say you've got let's just say it's a political conversation about two candidates, which, in the last several years, that has been a pretty, polarizing topic. People feel like, well, if I say what I'm thinking right now, the group will get mad, they might ostracize me. Just saying I haven't made up my mind and giving some pros and cons, it turns out we know from research that groups never punish individuals that haven't made up their mind. And what you'll see is, if I say, I'm not so sure, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, if other people start to mimic that, then you know that this is an illusion and you've given them an escape hatch.